All yours.
Okay, Val. So let's start with the idea of vibe coding and AI coding tools. So there's a lot of, for years we had the emphasis on having a coder be a co-founder of a company. And there are cases where that does happen. There's also cases where you might outsource your coding to a software development firm to get an MVP built, maybe more. Now we're seeing this proliferation of generative AI writing lines of code. I actually saw recently someone spun up was, for all intents and purposes, the equivalent to DocuSign in like a day. Very, very low-fi version of DocuSign they spun up in a day. What is the benefit and what's the upside and the downside to vibe coding, to using AI to write the code?
So from a coder perspective, AI will enable you to write your code faster and quicker. And also people with a lower level of skill, of coding skill, can now be more productive. So AI amplifies your coding skill. From a technical perspective, the code that it generates might give you a proof of concept or a first initial product version, right? So that means you can test for traction very quickly. Now, the problem with it is that the code that it generates tends to be, unoptimized. And so that means that when you reach scale, you're going to have to spend effort at professionalizing the code and making the code more efficient. So that's the implications from a coder perspective. Now, from my perspective as a patent lawyer, I see that vibe coding enables anybody to clone any other software. Like in the example that you mentioned, DocuSign could be cloned in a day or two. So that means that you need to move your IP protection more toward upfront instead of waiting until the end, right? So you should be thinking about patenting at the time that you start coming up with your concept, because you're doing this so fast. You can document your ideas, and then work with a law firm like ours who can move very quickly to put all that into a provisional patent application, because your designs are still iterating, right? Get to a stable point, and then you're going to throw it out for testing to see if people love the product, see if you have some traction. The moment that you're probably going to iterate a few more rounds, and that's okay. In those iterations, you might want to do another provisional application. At some point, your design's going to stabilize, you're going to find traction, and you're ready for your version 1.0 release. That is when you should take that information, take the provisionals that you've done, compile them into a single non-provisional, which will get examined, and then file them. And so that's the best way that you protect your concepts, because now coding is no longer a barrier to your business model. And that means you need to move much quicker, front load your IP consideration in the front end because of the speed that it's coming along.
So if I'm using AI to generate my code, if I'm using vibe coding as it's called, what are my considerations? What's the upside and downside for me as the coder?
From a coding perspective, AI is going to greatly accelerate your efficiency. And that means that even, number one, the average coder will get far faster in terms of completion of the work. Number two, you no longer need to be an expert coder to create great software applications. Now, the ultimate end product of an AI-based code may not be as efficient as a custom crafted code. So the vibe coding methodology is perfect for, you can also tie this to the lean business methodology, where what you do is you code some sample first, then you release it out and you test it and you get feedback from customers. And then you go back and then you do some more quick iterations. Ultimately, you're going to get into your target end software a lot faster than if you had to code everything by hand. Now, one downside of using LLMs to code for you is that the code may not be optimized. So that means that once you find traction, you are going to have to develop resources into it and clean up the code and make it run more efficient. If you look at Facebook as an example, they came up with this, the user interface. And then when it got traction, and the servers were literally melting down because of use, that's when they hire PhDs to come in and fine tune the code. So from a lean product development perspective, I think LLM, the AI vibe coding concept, aligns very well with that. You just have to be aware that the coding ultimately will need to be tweaked if it's going to be deployed as a professional, software.
Okay. Now, from the legal side, you use Claude, you use ChatGPT to generate lines of code for you. What's protected, if anything, when you're having your code created by generative AI?
If the AI just on its own creates some code, then that is not protectable under the copyright system or the patent system. Now, having said that, if you as a human guides the LLM and then you tell it what to do and it does it and it stitches it in, and then you in the end retain creative control over it, you are the author and that is patentable. So therefore you should document to the extent that you control the LLM, what part is done by you, what part is done by the LLM. That is excellent documentation to have in case somebody questions whether or not is this patentable or copyrightable because it was done by an LLM. Now, the patent office has come out and stated that just because you use an AI to help you doesn't mean that it is not patentable, but you just have to make sure that you retain control over it.
Because most coding is, it's considered more like fluid in that you're probably going back and forth between things. Like you're probably writing some code, you're probably using ChatGPT or you're using an LLM to help generate some lines of code for you. So, let's say your product is a combination of things you thought of yourself and some stuff you grabbed from prompts. Is your entire product restricted? And also at what point, what aspects of your product are protected? And at what point do you claim or seek protection on them?
So the answer to that is it's answered by the way you claim the invention. So let's take an example. Say you created a new DocuSign type of system where you might have an interface to receive the signature, or you might have a voice interface where the person says, I signed this invoice. Let's use that hypothetical. And then that thing the AI translate that voice into your signature and stamp it on a document, let's say. So the component where it's novel is that I told the system that I want to have a voice input to simulate my, written signature. So that is the novel part of it, right? The AI just simply takes that and then map it into some handwriting simulating your signature. That component is done automatically. And so therefore that is not novel. So your claim shouldn't be trying to claim what the AI is generating the actual signature. It should be focusing on what you invented, which is you can use voice as a way to authenticate and sign a document. That is your invention. It is not the fact that the AI sign off on it for you, because if the AI did that, you didn't invent that aspect. So that's a good hypothetical to use for reference.
Let's talk about the thing you wrote in here about why VCs are now prioritizing startups with patent protection. Tons of VCs are looking to invest in AI. So we were kind of in a Wild West era of AI. What trends are you observing with AI as it relates to legal considerations on the investment side?
We've seen that VCs recently, they relied less and less on patent protection because they think that it's too expensive and it takes too long. Well, patent PC, we've changed that equation because we ourselves use AI to help us draft the application. So we've cut down the cost and the time. And our methodologies in interacting with the patent office also increases the allowance rates, and therefore reduces the time frame that the VCs are worried about. So from an abstract viewpoint, if coding is becoming so easy that anybody can copy you, why would an investor put money in you? We've seen examples of this in the Kickstarter space, where what happened is you literally on a Kickstarter, you have a video that describes how your product works. You have detailed documentation, the specification of how it should work. And we've seen many cases where you did that, guess what? If you have traction on funding, your competitors out in, let's say, the Far East or down in Africa, they'll look at it and they'll say, oh, yeah, let me clone that. And you'll see those clone products appearing on Amazon and eBay's before even you're funding, the closing of your Kickstarter project. So if I were an investor and now I'm saying, hey, AI has dropped the cost of coding down so that anybody can develop a software now, why should I invest money in a company that's going to be copied the next day? So therefore, it implies that patent and the IP moat will become very significant for startup founders in the future.